Hello and welcome to Rising. I'm Amber Duke, joined again by Jessica Burbank because it is Rising Friday and we're here to bring you the news.
Happy Rising Friday, Amber, and all of our wonderful Rising viewers who we love very dearly. Amber, what's going on over in D.C.?
Well, Jessica, yesterday, New York Judge Arthur Engoron denied former President Trump's request and declined to delay enforcement of the $355 million in penalties Trump was fined in his civil fraud case. As of Engoron's ruling last Friday, Trump has 30 days to cough up the $300-some-odd million. Meanwhile, down in Georgia, evidentiary hearings over motions to dismiss District Attorney Fonnie Willis from the state's prosecution of Donald Trump concluded without closing statements. Nathan Wade, who is also facing dismissal from the case, pushed back against the judge's plans to interview his former attorney and associate regarding the timeline of his and Willis's relationship. In the meantime, the Fulton County Board of Ethics will discuss ethics complaints against Willis during their March 7th meeting.
Meanwhile, let's check in with how things are going on the other side of the aisle. Now, the Biden White House said it was time for Republicans to drop their impeachment inquiry against the president after his brother, James Biden, testified Wednesday that the pair had no involvement in one another's business dealings. Yesterday, the FBI informant indicted for making up allegations central to the impeachment case against President Biden was rearrested after prosecutors appealed a judge ruling that had allowed him to be released with a GPS monitor ahead of the trial. Now, the New York Post reported yesterday that a senior CBS reporter was laid off while working on reporting on the Hunter and Joe Biden case, whether or not they had their confidential files seized by CBS in an unprecedented move. Per the Post, the network took Catherine Herridge's notes upon terminating her employment and haven't given them back. One source told the Post, quote, "They never seize documents when you're let go. They want to see what damaging documents she has." I found that to be kind of shocking. I don't know about you, Amber, but I understand it's standard protocol at so many places to sort of lock down someone's office to make sure they can't get on their computer because there's all kinds of things they could do in retaliation because they're upset they're being fired. Now, it's my understanding that a rep also told the Post, a rep from CBS, that is, that they've locked down the office, they're not going through her files, and if she comes, with her own representation, then she'll be able to retrieve her files. But it's unclear if that just applies to physical documents or the files on her computer as well.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that that's the case, that she is able to get those notes and files back. I've been fired from media jobs before, which is not a secret. I've also left jobs on good terms. It has never been the case in my experience that I have been not able to take my notes, my sources, the things that I'm investigating with me. And I think it's very troubling that CBS is giving this perception, at least, that they are trying to take her files away from her. If what that rep says is true, then that's good. She should be allowed to take those. The idea that a media outlet would try to take a journalist's sources and potentially get insight into who she was talking to and where she was getting her information from outside of the normal editorial process is very, very concerning. I want to go back to the first story that we hit on in this opening, which is this Trump judgment out of New York. And Judge Engoron has decided that Trump is not able to delay the collection on this $355 million judgment pending an appeals process, which means he's going to have to post that $355 million plus about $100 million in interest on an appeal bond just to be able to continue appealing the case without going through the collections process, which is supposed to start in 30 days. In this case, it seems like the process is the punishment in terms of what Judge Engoron has handed down. And I think it's important to remember, too, the details of this case in terms of just how I think bogus the entire verdict was. This case started with Judge Engoron determining that Mar-a-Lago, or accepting a judgment rather, that Mar-a-Lago, the Florida resort, was only worth $18 million. The land alone would have been worth much more than that. There were quibbles over the square footage in Trump's New York condo, which There is a reasonable explanation for why that square footage was put the way that it was by Trump's team when they were trying to get these loans from banks. But most importantly, there was no apparent victim in this fraud case. The banks who testified, who had done these loan deals with Trump, said that they were actually quite happy with the course of business, that they would do business with Trump again, that they actually made money on their deals. He paid everything back in full. And typically when you have a fraud case like this, there has to be someone who has been a victim of that fraud. And that wasn't the case here. I think this is out of all of the cases that Trump has been facing, this one to me reeks of the most political and politicized.
I would say, the victims of this crime are probably just like business owners who would have gotten loans from those banks had that capital not gone to Donald Trump. He made $370 million in ill-gotten gains, according to the financial records here. So that's, loans that he's gotten that he wouldn't have gotten otherwise, or capital gains he made off of those loans that he wouldn't have had if he had not inflated the price of his assets, which, on his own tax records, that same property in Florida, in Mar-a-Lago, was listed at around 18 million. And then to get loans and on his own records of financial assets, it was over 700 million. So that's an insane differential there. So when his own records are showing that at one point on his taxes, it was 18 million as reported by him and his team. And then when he's trying to get loans and inflate his assets for Forbes, which we know he did through the testimony in this case, and saying it's $700 million, it's pretty deliberate. I mean, is it a case where someone's physically hurt, or, does it have the same weight as a lot of the criminal cases we hear? No, of course not. No one's been hit by Donald Trump or murdered, right? So it doesn't seem bad. But is it bad that $370 million could have been had by small businesses in New York City? I just think that it's just dishonest of him to do this. But Letitia James's response of not granting this stay, I think, just makes sense in this case, because what that would do would prevent the court in New York from seizing his assets in other states. And of course, he used his assets in other states, in the state of Florida, to get the loans in New York City. So why should they not be able to seize those assets in order for this settlement to be paid in full?
Yeah, I think the problem here is that there's a difference between a tax assessment value and a fair market value. And when you're trying to get a loan from a bank, you would typically use the larger of those two valuations. It's a standard practice in real estate. A tax assessment value is generally a percentage of the fair market value. So it's normal that it would be significantly lower. That's pretty much how everybody operates in terms of deciding what their property value is. So to me, I think the judge in this case just fundamentally didn't understand the difference between those two numbers and how exactly they're calculated. Not to mention that banks have their own independent auditors and their own independent assessors who determine the true value of someone's property. So they're not just going based off of Trump's word when they're giving him a loan. So the idea that he wouldn't have gotten them if he had supposedly given them this $18 million tax assessment value, I don't think is accurate, because the banks would have done their own determination as to whether or not this was good business. I know we're running a little bit out of time on this segment, but let's get to the Fonnie Willis incident. We talked a little bit about this last week in terms of whether or not she could be disqualified from this case. Her testimony, whoever told her it was a good idea to do that was obviously drunk or high or something, because it's just horrible what she went up there and did. Basically admitted to campaign finance violations, tried to over-explain her way out of the fact that she apparently lied about when her and Nathan Wade's relationship began. And just, I want to get your thoughts, Jess, on whether or not you think she will ultimately be removed from this case after this recent testimony and evaluation of her and Nathan Wade's relationship, and whether or not there was a level of corruption and self-dealing here.
I think there's going to reach a point where Fonnie Willis realizes it's the best thing to do to step down. I don't think she'll be forced out. I would hate to see that. I think her, stepping down and having another prosecutor take over the case would be best for the result of the case, because a lot of this drama is really distracting from what they're there to prosecute, which is how Donald Trump handled getting the results in for the 2020 election in Fulton County, Georgia. I was in Georgia on that day, and there were people protesting in Fulton County. There were people who were very upset and were wondering if the same thing that happened at the Capitol was happening in Fulton County on the day of January 6th. So there was a lot of energy around overturning the election fraud there. That's really what the focus of this case should be. So I think, what's going to happen is things will come to a head, and it won't be that she ends up, being forced out. I think, if she is getting forced out, but she'll save the face by saying it's her own decision. But I want to go back to quickly the valuation of Trump's property. This was a differential that was huge, 18 million versus over 700 million. It was around, 2 to 3% is what it was valued at as tax reports showed by Donald Trump compared to, the market value. That's a differential that's usually 80 to 90%. And what was reported on taxes was 2.5% about. So yes, it's usually different, but not different to the magnitude that Trump reported it was.
All right, we'll be back with more Rising after this.